Before you understand what happened to me, you need to understand something about the kind of danger nobody warns you about. We spend our whole lives watching the front door, checking the locks, teaching our kids not to talk to strangers. But nobody sits you down and tells you that the most dangerous person in your life might already have a key, might already know your alarm code, your doctor's name, and exactly how much you have left in your retirement account. Nobody prepares you for the quiet kind of betrayal, the kind that comes through the back door carrying a casserole dish. So before you judge anyone in this story, I want you to ask yourself one honest question. What would you have done if it was happening to you? My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old, and I found out my own son had been systematically dismantling my life from the inside out, while I sat across from him in a room that smelled like burnt coffee and damp carpet, and thanked him for caring so much about me. That moment is where this story ends. Let me tell you where it begins. I live in Akron, Ohio, have for 31 years. The kind of neighborhood where the same families have lived in the same houses since Reagan was president, where people wave from driveways without really stopping to talk, where the church on the corner still puts hand-painted signs on the marquee. After my wife Patricia passed 3 years ago, I rattled around that house like a marble in a coffee can. 4 bedrooms, too much silence, too many of her coffee mugs still in the cabinet that I couldn't bring myself to move. I retired early from the water district, 34 years of infrastructure work, underground pipes, pressure systems, the invisible machinery that keeps a city alive. The kind of job where nobody thanks you until something goes wrong. I was good at it. Patient, methodical, not easily rattled. Those qualities saved me later. I didn't know that yet. My son Marcus is 37. He's Patricia's boy from before we married. But I raised him from age 4, fed him, coached his little league team, taught him to drive a stick shift in the parking lot of a closed Kmart on a rainy Saturday. I never once thought of him as anything but mine. When Patricia died, Marcus stepped up. That's what I told myself, and for a while I believed it. He started calling more, coming by on Sundays, helping me sort through her things when I couldn't face it alone. He brought food. He sat with me through the first awful holidays. He called me Dad and meant it, or so I thought. When he offered to help me set up a few smart home devices so I wouldn't feel so isolated, I let him. He said it was about safety, about peace of mind. He said, "Dad, you're in that house alone. At least this way I know you're okay." He installed a smart speaker in the living room, one in the kitchen, a smart display on the nightstand. He set up an app on my phone called Care Connect that he said would let us share calendars, let him check in remotely if I ever didn't respond to a morning message. He walked me through all of it, smiling, patient. He said, "It's just like having me in the next room." That sentence took on a different meaning later. It was my neighbor's daughter who first noticed something was wrong, and she noticed it completely by accident. Donna is 42, lives 3 houses down from me with her mother Ruth, who I've known for 20 years. Donna works in network security for a firm out of Cleveland, drives back on weekends to help Ruth with the yard. She was sitting on Ruth's porch one Saturday afternoon in early November, running a routine scan on her laptop just to kill time. The kind of thing she said she does without thinking, like checking email. She knocked on my door an hour later. She was polite about it, the way people are when they're about to tell you something that will rearrange everything you thought was true. "Gerald," she said, "I don't want to alarm you, but your Wi-Fi is doing something it shouldn't be doing." I laughed. I told her I wasn't very technical. She said, "I know. That's why I'm here." I let her in. She sat at my kitchen table with her laptop and walked me through what she had found. The smart devices Marcus had installed weren't just connected to the manufacturer's cloud. They were running secondary data transfers through a third-party application. Persistent, scheduled, pulling audio fragments at regular intervals and routing them to an external account. The Care Connect app on my phone had permissions that went well beyond calendar sharing, location tracking, microphone access, contact list, call logs. She used the phrase passive surveillance, and I had to ask her to repeat it. She said, "Gerald, someone has set this up to listen to you regularly, without you knowing." I sat very still. Outside, a car passed slowly. The furnace clicked on. I said, "My son installed all of this." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I think you need to call someone." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark in the bedroom I used to share with Patricia, staring at the smart display on the nightstand, the soft blue glow of it, and thought about all the conversations I'd had in that room, about her life insurance payout, about the house, what it might sell for now in this market, about my pension, my accounts, the safe deposit box at First Merit that I'd mentioned to Frank, my oldest friend, one afternoon while we sat in the kitchen drinking coffee and thinking nobody was listening. I thought about the times Marcus had asked gentle questions over dinner. Dad, have you thought about whether the house is too much for one person? Dad, have you looked at those senior living communities on Route 18? Dad, have you updated your will since Mom passed? Each question wrapped in concern, each one landing so softly I never heard the accumulation of them until now. By morning, the fear had hardened into something I recognized from my years in infrastructure. The cold, flat clarity that comes when a system has failed and you have to stop feeling bad about it and start figuring out what to do next. I called Donna before 6. She came over with coffee and walked me through what to document. She showed me how to screenshot the app permissions, export the activity logs, preserve what could be preserved without triggering anything on the other end. She spoke slowly and without judgment, the way good people do when they understand that the person across from them is only barely holding it together. I asked her if she was sure. She said, "Gerald, I've done this professionally for 15 years. I'm sure." That morning, I drove to the Summit County Sheriff's substation on 7th Street. The waiting room had plastic chairs and a bulletin board with flyers for community watch programs. I told the officer at the desk what I had. She brought out a detective named Weston, middle-aged, careful eyes, the kind of man who has heard everything at least twice and lets you finish your sentences. He looked at what Donna had printed out. He looked at my phone. He called someone in the technology crimes unit. And after about 40 minutes of very quiet conversations I wasn't part of, he came back and sat down across from me. "Mr. Gerald," he said, "these aren't standard factory configurations. Somebody modified the account permissions manually and set up the data routing deliberately. This wasn't an accident." I asked what that meant. He said, "It means whoever did this wanted consistent access to your daily conversations, not a one-time intrusion, ongoing monitoring." My mouth felt dry. I asked, "What were they looking for?" Weston folded his hands on the table. "That's what we need to find out. But I'll tell you what we see sometimes in cases like this. People build a picture. They collect information about finances, about health, about mental state, about whether the person seems capable of managing their own affairs." The phrase "capable of managing their own affairs" sat in the room like a stone. He told me not to confront Marcus. He told me to act normally. He told me to let him show me who he was. Normal. I drove back to my house in the gray November cold and sat in the driveway for a long time before I went inside. The smart speaker was still on the kitchen counter. The smart display was still glowing on my nightstand. I thought about unplugging them, felt the urge the way you feel, the urge to pull a splinter immediately, but I didn't. I went back inside, made myself lunch, and started paying attention differently. That Saturday, Marcus came for his usual visit. He brought a rotisserie chicken from the Giant Eagle on State Road, same as always, and he sat at my kitchen table with his coat still on, the way he always does when he's in a hurry to leave. I watched his eyes, the way they moved around the room, landing on the smart speaker, landing on my phone on the counter, landing on the stack of mail I'd left by the toaster. He asked if I'd thought any more about the financial advisor he'd mentioned. Said the guy had helped a few of his friends' parents consolidate things, simplify, make things easier to manage. I said I was thinking about it. He said, "Dad, you've got a lot of assets tied up in this house alone. It would be smart to have someone help you organize things, in case anything ever happened." In case anything ever happened. He'd said some version of that sentence at least 4 times in the past 6 months. I'd heard it as love, every single time. I said, "You're probably right." He relaxed, just slightly, just enough. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I went to the front closet where I keep Patricia's old document box, the fireproof one we bought after a neighbor's house fire in 2009. I pulled it out. I hadn't opened it in months. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for a thin manila folder near the back that I didn't recognize. I opened it with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. Inside were 4 printed pages. Legal templates. The kind you can pull off the internet if you know what you're looking for and how to modify them. I recognized the headings because Detective Weston had used some of the same language just 2 days earlier. Durable power of attorney. Petition for appointment of guardian. A handwritten note clipped to the back, in Marcus's precise, slanted printing. Notes, really, the kind you jot to yourself when you're organizing a task. Dad resistant to discussing. Mention forgetfulness again at next visit. Need signed before year end, for tax purposes. That last line turned my stomach more than anything else on the page, not because it made sense legally. It didn't, because it revealed that he was working on a timeline, that there was a schedule to this, that my own son had been treating me like a project with a deadline. I took photographs of every page with my phone. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it. I closed the document box and put it back in the closet. Then I sat down on the floor of my hallway with my back against the wall, and I allowed myself exactly 3 minutes to fall apart. After that, I stood up and called Detective Weston. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he let out a long breath. "All right," he said, "here's where we need to be careful. What you have is circumstantial. Templates aren't illegal. A note to himself isn't a crime. What makes this prosecutable is action. We need him to move." I said, "What does that look like?" Weston said, "It looks like him contacting institutions on your behalf without authorization. It looks like him misrepresenting your capacity to someone who has to document it. It looks like a paper trail with his name on it." I said, "How do we get that?" He said, carefully, "Over the next 2 weeks, I became a person I'm not entirely proud of, though I have made my peace with it. I had conversations I designed. I said things out loud in my kitchen that I knew might be heard and recorded. I mentioned to the empty room that I'd been having trouble remembering to take my medication. I said, while standing in the backyard raking leaves, that I wasn't sure I understood my pension statements anymore. I talked to Frank on the phone in the living room about how the house felt like too much work, and how I'd been thinking about maybe letting someone help me manage things. Every time, Marcus responded within a day. A text, a call, a casual visit. He brought information about senior living communities. He forwarded an article about the benefits of establishing financial guardianship before a health crisis. He mentioned his financial advisor friend again. He said, "I just want to make sure you're protected, Dad." I said, "I know you do." One afternoon, I pushed it further than I meant to. I was in the garage and I said out loud, thinking about it more than performing it, that I sometimes worried I was turning into my father, who had dementia in his final years. I shouldn't have said it. It wasn't strategic. It was just true. And fear makes you honest at the worst moments. That evening, Marcus sat across from me at dinner and said, very gently, "Dad, I've noticed some things lately. Small things. Have you thought about seeing Dr. Ferris? Just a checkup. It wouldn't hurt to have documentation of your baseline." Documentation of your baseline. I looked at him for a moment. His face was so familiar. 33 years of knowing that face. The gap in his eyebrow where he'd fallen off a bike at age 9. The way he tilted his head when he was certain about something. I said, "That might be a good idea." He smiled. The relief in it was genuine. That was the part that was hardest to sit with. Not the manipulation. The relief. He actually believed he was doing the right thing. 2 days later, Weston called. His tone had shifted slightly, more focused. "Mr. Gerald," he said, "we've been in contact with your financial institutions as a courtesy. There have been inquiries. Someone identifying themselves as your authorized representative called First Merit last week, asking about the process for adding a co-signatory to your accounts. They gave your name and date of birth and described themselves as your adult son acting on your behalf." I closed my eyes. He continued. "The branch manager flagged it because no authorization was on file. She held the call and reported it. That's the paper trail." He paused. "There's something else. We subpoenaed the data logs from the third-party application. Donna's documentation of the audio routing was accurate. The account the data was being sent to is registered to an email address with Marcus's initials." I said, "What happens now?" He said, "Now we make an appointment. The meeting was set for a Thursday morning at the First Merit branch on South Main, in a glass-walled conference room that looked out onto the parking lot. I drove there in the gray cold with my hands steady on the wheel and the radio off. I wore my good wool coat, the one Patricia bought me for our 20th anniversary. I don't know why that felt important. Marcus arrived first. He was dressed carefully, pressed shirt, the leather portfolio he'd recently started carrying, the kind that makes a person look organized and credible and like they handle things. He hugged me at the door. The hug was real. That was the thing I had to keep reminding myself. The affection was real. The danger was also real. Both of those things were true at the same time, and they didn't cancel each other out. The branch manager, a woman named Andrea Simmons, introduced herself and the man beside her from the bank's fraud and elder protection unit. Detective Weston sat to the side with a colleague, notebook closed, watching. Andrea set a folder on the table and opened it without drama. She said to Marcus, "We appreciate you coming in. I want to make sure we're all on the same page about recent activity on your father's accounts." Marcus nodded. He said he just wanted to help me get organized. He glanced at me and smiled. He had no idea yet. Andrea turned over the first page. The call transcript. The inquiry about consignatory access, she asked, in the neutral tone of someone who has done this many times, whether Marcus had been authorized to make that call. He said, "Well, we've been discussing it. Dad and I have talked about having me help manage things." She said, "Do you have documentation of that authorization?" He said, "We're working toward it. It's an ongoing conversation." Weston leaned forward just slightly. He said, "Marcus, were you aware that the smart devices you installed in your father's home were transmitting audio data to an external account registered to your email?" The shift in Marcus's face was not dramatic. It was small. A tightening around the eyes. A slight stillness in the jaw. The way a person looks when they understand for the first time that the floor is glass. He said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Andrea placed a printed log on the table. Weston placed a second document beside it. Between them, the evidence was clear and dated and specific. Marcus looked at me, "Dad." He said it like a question. I met his eyes. I said, "I know." He tried several things in quick succession. He said the devices were configured that way by default. He said he'd been worried about me and had set up monitoring for my own safety. He said I had given him verbal permission months ago and didn't remember. Each explanation landing softer than the last. Weston said quietly, "Marcus, we also have the folder from your father's document box. The templates, the notes. Need signed before year end." His voice was flat, not cruel, just precise. Marcus went still. Weston continued. "Unauthorized access to financial accounts under false representation. Audio surveillance without consent. Preparation of legal documents intended to remove your father's autonomy without his knowledge." He paused. These are not small matters. For the first time, Marcus looked like the boy I had raised. Not the careful, organized man in the pressed shirt with the leather portfolio. Just the boy. Confused and cornered and suddenly very young. He said I was trying to protect him. I looked at my son for a long time. I thought about the parking lot at that closed Kmart, the rain on the windshield, the way he'd white-knuckled the steering wheel on his first left turn. I thought about how proud he'd been, how I'd told him, "You've got good instincts. Just trust them." I said, "No, you were trying to protect the assets. There's a difference." The room was very quiet. Andrea closed the folder. She explained, in measured language, that the matter was being referred to the appropriate authorities, that any further contact from Marcus regarding my finances or health decisions would be treated as interference. Detective Weston informed Marcus that he would be contacted in the coming days. When Marcus stood to leave, he didn't look at Weston. He didn't look at Andrea. He looked at me, and his face held something I hadn't seen there in a long time. Not guilt. Something older. Something that looked, if I'm honest, like grief. He said, "I didn't think you'd fight back." I stood up and buttoned my coat. I said, "I know you didn't." He walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt much heavier than it sounded. Outside, the November sky was the flat white of old porcelain. I stood in the parking lot for a moment and breathed cold air until my chest stopped being tight. A woman walked past pushing a stroller, paying no attention to me at all. The ordinary world, continuing. I drove home. I made coffee. I stood in Patricia's kitchen in the quiet house and looked at the smart speaker on the counter, and then I unplugged it. Then I went to the bedroom and unplugged the display. Then I went through every room and undid what Marcus had built in the name of caring for me. It didn't take as long as I expected. The next few weeks were not easy or clean or resolved in any satisfying way. These things rarely are. I met with a lawyer, a woman named Carol who specialized in elder law, and she helped me understand exactly what Marcus had been building toward and exactly what had been stopped. I updated every document that mattered. I changed passwords, account numbers, beneficiary designations. I closed the CareConnect app and had my phone factory reset. I kept the fireproof box, but I moved it. Detective Weston called twice. The investigation continued. He didn't make promises. I didn't ask for them. Frank came over on a Sunday and we sat in the kitchen and I told him everything. He listened the way he always listens, without filling silences. When I finished, he said, "You know you didn't cause this." I said, "I know." He said, "Do you actually know that, or are you just saying it?" I said, "I'm working on it." That was the most honest conversation I had in months. Marcus and I have not spoken. Not yet. I don't know what that conversation looks like, or whether it comes in weeks, or years, or never. What I know is that love, even real love, does not make a wrong thing right. And protecting yourself from someone you love is not a betrayal. It is the hardest kind of self-respect. I still live in the same house, same kitchen, same furnace that ticks in the walls at night, same coffee mugs I still can't bring myself to move. But the house feels different now. Not lighter, just honest. I don't use smart speakers anymore. I know that sounds like a small thing, and maybe it is. But there's something I've come to appreciate about the old boundaries between private and shared, between what happens inside your walls and what travels out of them. I bought a simple clock radio for the kitchen. It plays music and tells me the time and doesn't know my name. Late at night, I still think about the moment in that conference room when Marcus said, "I didn't think you'd fight back." I've turned that sentence over many times since then. I don't think he was being cruel. I think he believed it. I think he looked at a 63-year-old man living alone in a house full of silence and made an assessment, the way people sometimes do when they see grief and mistake it for weakness. What I want to tell you, if you've been listening to this and finding pieces of it familiar, is this: grief is not weakness. Age is not helplessness. And the quiet life you've built, your name on the deed, your money in the bank, your right to make your own decisions, those are not things you owe anyone just because they love you or say they do. Pay attention to the questions that get asked more than once. Pay attention to who benefits from the story being told about you. Pay attention when someone works very hard to make you feel like you need to be managed. Ask for help when you need it. But know the difference between someone offering a hand and someone reaching for the wheel. The most dangerous thing about what happened to me is how ordinary it all looked. The Sunday dinners, the chicken from Giant Eagle, the patient smile, the gentle voice saying, "I just want to make sure you're protected, Dad. Protect your documents. Protect your accounts. Protect your right to speak for yourself. And if something feels wrong, even if you can't name it yet, even if the person making you feel that way is someone you would have trusted with your life, write it down. Save the messages. Call someone who knows more than you do. Because these things survive in the dark. They fall apart in the light. I'm Gerald. I'm 63 years old, and I'm still the one making decisions about my own life. Thank you for spending time with me today. If any part of this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Uncle Arthur and share this with someone who might need to hear it, because the best thing we can do for each other is pay attention.